Welcome to Becoming Parents Podcast. I'm your host, Jennifer Campbell. I'm a doula in Washoe County, Nevada, a Medicaid provider, a lactation educator, childbirth educator, and mom of 18. You can find me and connect on doulainreno.com. Remember, give a shout out to those who are brave enough to share their stories with us on how they have become parents. Let's dive in. Welcome to Becoming Parents Podcast. That's where we're at today. I'm Jennifer Campbell, the host, and I'm here with Mark. And Mark, I am so excited to hear your story. I want you to jump in and share your parenting journey with us.
Sure, absolutely. First and foremost, when anybody ever asks me what's the most important thing you've done in your life to date, the kind of milestones kind of thing, the very first thing I always tell everybody is, I want to be a father. I want to be a good father.
Mm.
So that was first. That was just such a high priority for me, for my own journey. And what I found, my parents did the best they could, and they were loving parents, and they sacrificed, and they made sure I had everything and anything that I ever wanted, and then they never wanting for anything, and so on. And I just, that was great support. It wasn't until like later in life, like in my 50s, where I suddenly realized, something's not quite right. And I've known I was adopted my entire life. I mean, my parents didn't sugarcoat it. They told me right out of the gate, and it was always positioned in a way that was very loving. You're our special angel. We love you so much. But my mom had a lot of problems with her own delivery. She had 4 miscarriages. So for them, self doing it themselves wasn't really an option. It was almost a death sentence, in fact. So for me, I was like, the saving grace. They were going to do anything and everything because, they were really excited about the whole thing. And I always been told from the beginning that, well, there was this Italian banker and his Polish secretary, and, one thing led to another. And so she went back to Poland to visit the relatives and came back 9 months later. And,
Yeah.
and, and that's that. Right. So, okay. But again, I around my 50s, just things, my life, just the way it was kind of unraveling. I was in a little bit of trouble, and I started seeking therapy. And as part of that therapy, I was talking with my therapist, and she was saying, I learned things about something called the primal wound. I guess there's a book about it, right? And the idea being that no matter what the adoptive parents do, an adopted child, fundamentally, according to this theory, has this sense that something was wrong, that they are abandoned, or that they weren't good enough, or whatever it was, right? And I just never paid any attention to it. I would tell you that if you had asked me in my 40s, do you ever want to find your birth mother? I would say, no, I have no interest in doing any of that, simply because my parents were very loving. Like,
Right.
and I had all the support and everything I ever needed, and they were my parents. Done, signed, sealed, delivered. And this other person saw fit not to keep me, so why continue with that? It seemed pointless to me.
Right.
I'm an actuary by profession, so numbers and logic kind of are ruling concepts. I would not emotional control is more like emotional ignorance.
I mean, some of us have that, at least so.
I've been better now that I've been going through therapy, but that was very much my mindset back at that point in time. So it's a lot of compression and sublimation and really ignoring the whole issue. So I said, all right, well, fine. We'll go through the process. We'll try to find some of this history and find out what the truth is. And maybe there's still some notes or some things that can be found. And yeah, I found myself going through like the Library of Congress,
Okay.
I went to the Library of Congress to get the yellow pages for New Haven in the 1960s, so that I could find names of adoption agencies that were in operation back then. and started calling those phone numbers because sometimes they would still be in business. Maybe they rolled over to a new phone number. I knew it was a church-based organization, so I started with that. And I kid you not, I'm making this phone call, and I was like this close just to giving up. And I make this phone call, and I called this agency in Hamden, Connecticut, and the woman answers the phone, and she goes, "Mark Jamilkowski?"
No. Oh my gosh.
And I'm like, yes. And she goes, I have your file right here. I'm like, why?
Yeah.
And she said, well, we're cleaning up some of the archives and stuff, and we're going through the stuff in the 1960s. And it's like, it's just serendipity. I happened to be going through the box that had your file in it, and it's sitting right here on my desk. And I
Wow.
was like, okay, well, she said, well, now you need to send me information to verify your identity and blah, 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 this, that, and the
Right.
other thing, right? So I verify myself. And then she says, well, while you were doing that and getting me that paperwork, I can tell you that I think there is a chance that your birth mother is still alive and I might be able to get a hold of her. Would you like me to do that? It's like, yeah. So it's very controlled gatekeeping, right? It just
Yes.
very controlled gatekeeping. And back then the objective was if you have somebody with like an Italian Polish mix in the genetics of the baby, you want to find an Italian Polish mixed heritage in the home. So
Okay.
kind of
Right.
that was what they were doing in the 1960s. Um, but anyway, it's like, all right, well, whatever you need to do, let me know how that goes. So she gets a hold of who I later know is Clara. And Claire's like, "Oh yes, sure. I would love to get a hold of him." Yeah, and I tried. Claire, older generation, not really technologically capable. I'm asking her to write. I wrote a letter. I wrote a letter and I shared it. I gave it to the adoption agency, who then gave it to her. And then I was waiting for her to write back. And like 3 months went by and no response. So I wrote a second letter, basically saying, "I get it. This is a lot. It's like the world's coming down around you. You're not really sure if you want to invite me in, and I get it. And I'm not really looking for anything from you other than to say, hi, I'm alive and I'm okay." And that's
Right.
what my letters pretty much said, and explained that my parents did a great job, and I love them very much, and they love me very much, and you basically made a great decision, for whatever reason you had, and I don't need to get into it with you in a letter, right?
Yeah.
But whatever that was, it seemed to work out. Um, and then she said, I heard evidently she had a lot of arthritis, so typing a letter and
Okay.
writing a letter, it was not her thing. So we ended up talking on the phone. And then talking on the
Okay.
phone led to text messages, which she would actually talk into an app that like text, wrote the text messages out.
Hmm.
I'll come back to why that's important in a second.
Okay.
And then eventually I went down to Florida to visit with her. In the course of all of that, I learned a lot about myself.
Mhm.
I learned how to better connect with my own emotions. I learned a lot about Clara and about her life. And during the midst of all of this, my own son was maturing between the ages of 15 to 20.
Okay.
I don't know if you have any teenage
I
boys in your life.
Yes, I do.
So, right.
I mean, not anymore, but
So,
I did. Yes.
so this, and I always, anybody, I tell everybody the same thing. Between 15 and 20, that's when I earned my parenting stripes.
Yeah. Okay.
But it was only because I was doing the therapy and I was having these conversations with Clara. It broadened me out. It matured me as a human being so that I was able to give my son better advice. I was able to be a better parent for him. Yeah. And I was just able to do so much more for him because of that. So it was all very valuable. In the
I think,
course of doing all of that and being that for him, I just kind of sat back and said, that was just so um, so impactful, so important that you can still see the impact on him today as a 26-year-old man with his fiance and his life in front of him, and just so much joy and stability and emotional maturity that he exudes, and the confidence that he has in his own self, in his self. Not in a bravado, but just a wonderful human being. And I just all of that wouldn't have been possible if I wasn't going through what I went through.
Do you feel like going through the process, and I want to definitely know more about the process. You wrote a book. I want to know all about that. But do you think going through the process was, did you not realize in the beginning you were kind of doing a, like a quote, self-help?
I was just so programmed in my mind that
Mm,
it didn't matter, that my parents were enough, that they provided me with everything and they loved me
yeah.
unconditionally, and that this whole thing, I really wasn't buying into the whole primal wound thing. And I was like, whatever. I mean, just stop. Um, I don't feel abandoned. My parents are right there at the end.
Right.
Look, I'll call them. They're right there. What's um But then I started realizing, again, through the assistance of the therapy as well during this whole time period, that a lot of what I thought about myself, going back to my own childhood, I have a lot of insecurities. And the way I coped with those insecurities was, in essence, to try to become what the other person I was interacting with expected of me.
Mm,
I was a chameleon. I really was never truly myself because evidently being myself wasn't good enough.
right.
I needed to be that. I needed to be the A plus student. I needed to be the good the person who told the best jokes at the party. I needed to be whatever it was, right? I needed to be that other thing rather than just allowing myself to be comfortable being me.
I was born in
And as a
19
result of that, go ahead,
I
sorry.
was born in, that's okay. I was born in 1970. So we're talking about the same you and I are in the same generation where I feel
Yep.
like at some point in a lot of our lives, we're recognizing whether it's, the wounding or the generational trauma. We didn't even say those words really, but we were trying
Oh,
to figure out how to, I don't know, rectify things that didn't feel quite right. So I
yeah.
think that this is fascinating that you weren't even in that space and yet you experienced it. So
Yes.
my ex-husband, we found his biological mom, and once they met, she flew out and met us and told the story, and it was crazy. You start to see nature versus nurture.
Hmm.
And once they had that connection, and he kind of connected with half sisters and stuff, um, he was all good. Like he didn't need anything beyond that. He kind of
Yeah.
like, oh, I get it now, and I can move on. But then I've
Right.
adopted 6 kids that are all adults, and I can see it. I can see what you're talking about in them. So yeah, I think our generation's trying to figure stuff out and make it better, but yeah.
Yeah. And the funny thing is, that whole story about the Italian banker and his Polish secretary, complete false. Completely false.
Okay.
Not even close to the reality of the truth, anywhere near the truth.
Okay.
And when I started finding out more about Claire's background, and you mentioned the book, that's where the
Yeah.
book comes from. Actually, the book has very little to do with me. The book talks about her mother, right? So her story of origin.
Yeah.
Uh, I think it's a little bit, yeah, yeah. It talks about her story of her origin, where and then in addition to her mother's story of origin, ultimately that's impacting how she grew up
Yeah.
and the circumstances that she got into, which ultimately led to me, right? And then she goes on with her life, and it was a really wild set of circumstances. I mean, she found out that she had ovarian cancer at the same time she found out that she was pregnant. And
Oh,
the
wow.
doctors were like, well, the husband's not around anymore. Um, and you're 8 months pregnant, but we can't wait anymore. Your ovarian cancer is taken off. So we got to do a hysterectomy and we got to get this baby out of you. And she decided to give me up for adoption. Oh, here is like, okay, from this operating room into that operating room she went, and I went from that room, the operating room, over to this waiting room, swaddled and given to parents.
Holy cow. She was young. How bizarre.
Yeah, it was she was in her mid 20s.
Okay, so I mean, still for ovarian cancer, she's not 50 or 60 or 80,
Right, right.
she's childbearing years, and the pregnancy and all the hormones can really accelerate certain cancers. So I'm
Yeah, I
sure it
think
was a
she would
huge
have
concern.
been 16, 18, 8. She was 18 in the mid 50s, so 10 years after that. Yeah, upper 20s. Yeah. Um,
I think it's
but
incredible that you went back to her mother. Like you really went back to see what is the story that
actually went
molded.
further back than that.
Uh, that's incredible.
I went back to the mid 1800s
All
be
right.
because, and this is one of those situations where, you have to ask the question, how did you end up there? And as it happens, the mother was Maria Luisa Moresco. Maria Luisa Moresco was a famous concert pianist. She was married to a guy named Strub, Max Strub, who was a famous international concert violinist. He was actually on the Führer's top 300 most important people of cultural and intellectual significance in the entirety of the German population. That's how important he was to that population. Uh, the the relationship that they had, however, they got married in 1938, but Clara was born in 1937, and the father, who would have been her father, never got to meet her because in 1936, late 1936, he went with the Mussolini troops to go fight in the Spanish Civil War. So he got killed in action, leaving Maria Luisa pregnant without a husband. So the question ultimately becomes, how did you end up there? So you have to go back to like 1860 to say what was going on in Italy that ultimately led to the mindset that dominated 1930s Italy. And that history also forms the history behind the town that's now called that there's a town in Italy called Moresco. And unraveling these facts and these people and that history and how it ties back to famous people in Italian history, and then ultimately creates its own history as you go forward in time, and how it all relates back to the relationship I'm having with this woman now as I'm understanding who she is and asking her questions and finding out what the hell happened to you, right? And what did you have to live through? And what was the relationship like with your mom? And what was that like growing up with Maria Luisa Moresco, a famous concert pianist? Oh, and by the way, your godmother is Maria Callas? Huh. Famous opera singer. I don't know. You know, lover of Onassis. I mean, so many famous things going on. And after a while, actually, I'm writing notes down because after a while, she's telling me all these dates, people's places, things, and I'm writing notes down, and I can't keep track of it all. I'm like, did that really happen? I mean, this is like some sort of fiction that she's made up in her mind, right? And I trace it back and I discover I read about it and I discover some of the underlying facts. And that's how the book materialized. At the end of the day, I had so much of this story built up that I had like 18 pages of outlined notes.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what that is? It's 10 pages per per page of outline, right? If you write it all out. So I figured a ghostwriter will take it and make it into something real. I'll just make a sophisticated outline by creating a 180 page or whatever. It turned out to be about 120 something odd pages. And then I found, and then I was in Austin on a business trip, and I was just wandering around Austin. I've been in Austin many times, so I know the city well. And walking along, I see these white tents, and I figure, oh, farmers market, barbecue, something. I don't know. It's gonna be interesting. I go, and there's I walk into this tent, and there's books. People are standing behind tables with books, and I'm like, what's going on? And a woman says, "Oh, this is the Austin Annual Book Fair. This is the publisher's tent. Over there, they have the demonstration tents. Over there, they're giving this, and I was like, wait a second, publishers." And I said, I don't know what to do with this project I have in the site I have," and I described it. And she goes, "Oh, you have a manuscript," and I'm like, "Yeah,
Something you
that's
never thought you'd say.
That's what I have. I have a
Yes.
manuscript." Right, right, right. So, and ultimately that's how the book came to be. And going back to those text messages I mentioned that
Mm.
Claire and I shared back and forth, there is one chapter in the book that encapsulates those text messages to the day she dies.
Oh, Mark, I'm so sorry.
But it's the journey.
Yeah. How great
Yeah.
that you got to meet her and learn so much more than most people would have even attempted. And I mean, I just think you came at it with just yeah, this might be cool curiosity.
Yeah,
And
I had no idea what to expect, and actually my birth father is still alive too,
oh, okay.
or he was when I reached out to him. But his attitude was more of, "Oh, you did okay for yourself. It all worked out. Great. What do you need from me?" I'm like, "Nothing." He goes, "Cool. I don't need anything from you either. Talk to you later."
Wow.
It's like,
All
all
right.
right, well, that's fine. I mean, completely within his rights. It's one of these things where um, there was no expectation. Right.
Yeah. Right.
I truly had zero expectations, and it would have been really unfair of me to have an expectation one way or the other for this person to have any sort of reaction other than to say, on one hand, it could have been, "Hey, wow, that's pretty cool. Tell me more about yourself. What's going on?" And wow, hey, I'm glad you reached out. And the family's going to get together for a barbecue in a few
Yeah.
months. How'd you like to come down and meet your half brothers and sisters? It could go one way.
Right.
Another way, another way it could go is um, uh, that woman was a bitch, and that whole experience was a point in my life I just sooner forget. Don't ever call me again. Okay, so when you call, you pick up the phone. You kind of prepare for
We
right,
don't know. Right. You do. That's true. Because when I found his birth mother, really weren't sure. A lot of things were closed back then. They were done by Christian organizations.
right,
The
right,
woman, a lot of the time, got pregnant. The family sent her away. She came back 10 months later, or 9 months
right,
later,
right,
or
right, right,
whatever.
right, right.
It was all very hush hush, and records were closed. And you're talking years and years and years later. So the odds of even connecting back then are, I think it's well, I'm originally from Rhode Island, so New England has all these little states that are a little bit more like people live there forever. And,
Yeah,
the neighbor and the neighbor. And so that's a little less surprising to me that you were able to find something, but still, I mean, it's still surprising. It's very surprising. And then you don't know what the reaction's going to
you
be.
really don't. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I guess the agency was so tight-lipped about even, and being such a gatekeeper is they wanted to make sure that it would be okay on the
Yeah.
mother's side. Is this okay for you? Are you accepting of this? So as there's no imposition. As it turned out, she had been going to the doctor for about, now remember I told you I was about 50 years of age or thereabouts when I reached out.
Right.
She had been going to the doctor for about 45 years complaining of chest pain. And they did all kinds of tests on her, and they were giving her all kinds of medication, and nothing was making her feel any better. She told me that when it was me,
Oh,
and then when I reached out to her, the pain went away.
that's pretty beautiful. How long did you know her? Did you spend time with her and get to know
Yeah.
her before she passed away?
It was about 6 or 7 years.
Okay. Did she read the book?
No, no, I wrote the book after she passed.
Okay. Darn it. That's okay. Now you, when you went to that publisher's house, Serendipity, the
Right.
in Austin, you were looking for a ghostwriter.
I was. Yeah. My profession is, again, as I'm an actuary of finance, numbers, healthcare is my business, but not writing. I never imagined myself being an author of anything. Um, I guess that's one of the great things about being, Amazon and the whole self-publishing industry that's out there now. You don't need to be represented by Macmillan or Random House or, Penguin Books or some of these big
Right.
names. Um, on the other hand, however, it is almost too easy. And yeah, if you sign up and get a Kindle Direct Publishing account, you can literally copy paste in a page of the phone book and publish it, and you'd be a published author too. Well, it's almost that easy. Almost. They do some quality checks. They won't let you do that, but it's it was an interesting process going through it. Again, I have a publisher and an editor, and she worked very closely with me all the way through it. I mean, I had no dialogue, 160 pages of dense,
Yeah.
just narrative storytelling with no dialogue and no character really developed at all. And she worked with me front to start to end, rather, to really get the whole thing in shape. And it's won a lot of awards, and it's gotten really great press, and I'm by no means a bestseller or of anything because I'm way below the radar screen. Remember how I mentioned Insecure, right?
Yes, right.
So my whole process, I sold the book and I got the book published. I put it, and I'll tell you what, my scariest day of my life so far has been when I pressed publish
Yeah.
and a little button on KDP because suddenly now I'm out there and there's
Yep.
so much of me woven into this book, right? And little tidbits, even, taking bits and pieces of my own personal boyhood and my childhood and what I did and weaving it into like the actions of a character, in like 1920 something or other, the idea that elements of me are woven throughout this whole book makes it
Hmm.
a very vulnerable thing. So for
Yeah.
me, I didn't do any marketing. I just published the book, and then I was like, Psst, I got one book.
Just in case somebody wanted
Just in case,
it.
just in
Yeah.
case. And then I gave it, and then all of a sudden, people started writing back, and they're like, 5 stars. Wow, so vivid, so compelling, emotional.
Hmm.
Yeah, I was overwhelmed. I was overwhelmed. But it was. It's more that I published it so that other people could know Clara and Maria Luisa's story. I didn't publish
Wow.
it to create a roadmap for how to find your birth mother. I didn't create it to
Yeah.
be a roadmap to say, here's where Mark came from.
All
It's
right.
more what they lived through and the struggles that they
Hmm.
went through, being going from the time period where Maria Luisa is at university in fascist Italy right after World War I and leading up to World War II,
Hmm.
surviving World War II to then be at the Air Force Base in Stuttgart and having this rambunctious, precocious, rebellious teenager to have to deal with on the base, who, no surprise, not surprising, gets involved with the GIs.
Don't they all? Right.
This, I mean, and then ultimately that leads to Clara's immigration to the United States as the wife of a GI and the development of her life in New Haven, Connecticut.
Hmm.
And fun fact, my grandmother lived in New Haven and West Haven her entire life.
Hmm.
When my parents took me down to go see Graham, and my father and I would go to this park that was by this fire station. And we would throw a baseball around a bit, and he'd throw, make me run and tire me out,
Right,
basically, so I
right.
behave. And then we'd go to the fire station. We go into the back of the fire station. They had a Coke machine. We put in 50 cents and we get the bottles of Coke, right?
Hmm.
The green bottles of
I
Coke.
remember. Yep.
And we would sit in the park. We'd have the green bottles of Coke. And then we'd go retrieve my mom from the hairdresser and we'd go over to Graham's house and we have the big dinner. Okay. And I'm describing this entire scene because literally 2 blocks down the street in the opposite direction was the rest of my family.
Isn't that crazy? I'm
My
not.
half my
Oh,
half brothers and Clara were living literally 2 blocks off of that same park in the opposite direction, just around the corner.
so crazy. I wonder how many times, you were right there next to each other. I had no
We
idea.
could have been playing in the park at the same
I
time.
exactly.
No idea. It's just wild to think that our lives were just so close to each other for such a
Yeah,
long period of time. Yeah. And I'm in contact with one of my half brothers. We still talk on a regular basis.
that's great.
Yeah.
You mentioned that it really helped you parenting your son, and you can still, so that's, I mean, this has been like 11 years if he was about 15 and he's 26 now.
Right.
So, did you did you share with him what was going on, or did you just connect with yourself more that you could connect with him better?
The latter.
Okay.
I didn't try to describe to him what I was learning and then show him how it was helping me with him. It was
Right.
more that I was internalizing and growing. And in as much as I was growing, I was able to understand better what decisions need to be made, and I was able to control myself and kind of channel my emotions in a way that was more productive as opposed to combative.
Wow.
It typical parenting kind of stuff that you deal with the conflicts were easily avoided because of what I had learned, or rather they weren't so much avoided. The conflicts were dealt with, they were addressed, and they were managed in a head-on kind of a more mature, more wise way because of this greater emotional maturity that I attained by virtue of not just meeting Clara, but also the other work that I had been continuing to do with my therapist all along, as it is too. Yeah.
Right.
So
How has that continued to affect you in ways that are surprising, and has it spilled over to other relationships? I would think if you're feeling more emotionally in tuned, it would affect a lot in your life, especially through
absolutely,
the process of writing the book.
absolutely. No two ways about it. It has affected me fundamentally. I feel like I'm literally a different person than I was when I was in my 40s and younger. You could say, well, you were in your 40s, you're probably different than you were in your 20s too. It's absolutely.
Yeah.
But I feel like the personal development, the growth, has allowed me to be more vulnerable and more emotionally connected in a way that has helped me be a founder of a health insurance company startup. It
Right.
helps me connect with my employees. It helps me manage the stress of what running a startup is all about. It's helped me with all of my relationships with everybody that I love, and really, quite frankly, anybody that I come in contact with. It
Yeah.
had, and you could, it's people will go to a yoga studio and they'll go for the workout, and that's part of it. Um, but there's a lot of the teachings that go into that We make fun of it, culturally. It's like, oh, the Miyagi thing, yeah,
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 yeah.
yeah, and the breathing, and yeah, yep, 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 yep. And they even have the apps like breathe in, breathe out. So yeah, yeah, yeah. So that is part of it, but you have to be able to connect the emotional development to those pieces to really kind of experience what's ultimately trying to be taught to you.
Yeah.
And quite frankly, a lot of what I just described became the impetus behind the next book I'm writing.
Oh, okay. This is a great way to wrap things up. Let's talk about the non-book writer writing a second book.
I know, right? Well, I got
Yes.
so much positive feedback from
Yeah.
the road to Moresco that I was like, well, wow. I mean, people seem to really like my writing, and my editor told me like, I tell a great story, and storyteller as a storyteller. So
Yeah.
I start getting these comparisons. Some authors, by the way, I got compared to. I was like, who? I had to go look them up, and I was like, oh, what? Just accolades and like well-known Pulitzer Prize winning. I'm like, no,
Hmm.
no, 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 no. I don't. I appreciate. Okay, so I appreciate it, but I'm not believing that for a second. But I appreciate that. Thank you. Um, yeah, and so I had enough support though, where the idea of trying it again.
Hmm.
But if you think about it, it's sort of a journey because the first one was a work of love. It was a work of
Right.
passion. It poured out of me. I literally sat down in the space of 6 weeks, wrote out the entire first bit of it, and then worked with the editor for almost a year to get it to a publishable standpoint.
Okay.
But that was all a work of passion. This is sort of in my journey as an author. This is my first attempt at writing something which is not directly connected to me. This is not about my life story in any way, shape, or
Hmm.
form. It has nothing to do with Maria Luisa or with Clara. It is out of left field with regard to that, right?
Right.
I mean, we're going back to the time of Augustus and the first emperor of Rome. It is historical fiction, again, because I find comfort in knowing that there are certain historical landmarks that keep the story on pace. These things happened. This is the structure of your story. You can't vary too far from that. This is what actually happened. I like that. Maybe that's my logic and my, actuarial brain network.
I love that.
But the effort to put together the second book will now be the true litmus test.
Mm.
Am I really a good storyteller? Is this really something that is something that I can come back to,
Hmm.
as I'm inspired to, or was the first work as a work of passion and the second work as a work of discovery and journey, the end of the road? And that's what we'll we'll see. We'll see what happens in October when I
I
publish.
love this. Okay. We have the link to your website. The book's on there. I know the second book will be on there when it releases.
Yep, yep. I'm
Um,
taking pre-orders for that now.
Excellent, excellent. So everybody can do that. Mark, thank you so much for
Yes.
this conversation. I really enjoyed you tremendously.
Thank you again for your interest and allowing me to be on your channel here, Jennifer. I really appreciate it.